Before this story begins, I need you to imagine something. A church locked for 32 years. No one enters, no one leaves. Now imagine. One morning, a child was found inside it. No doors broken, no windows open, no footprints. Just a boy, standing in front of the altar, like he had been waiting for someone to find him. If you love dark, emotional, old-school mystery stories like this, make sure you subscribe, because stories like this are never told twice. Now, let me tell you what really happened in 1893.
The town that rang bells without people. In 1893, the town of Blackridge was small, too small for secrets, or at least that's what people believed. Every morning, the church bell rang, but no one had opened the church in decades. The priest who served there disappeared in 1861. After that, the town council locked the building and never spoke about it again. It was October 14th, cold, fog sitting low across the streets. A baker named Thomas Hale was walking past the church. Then he stopped, because the church door was open, not broken, not forced, just open, like someone had unlocked it from the inside. The boy. Thomas stepped inside. Dust everywhere, old wooden smell, rotting hymn books. But near the altar, a small figure stood, barefoot, thin, maybe 9 years old, wearing clothes that looked very old, not dirty, just old, like they belonged to another time. The first words. Thomas spoke carefully. "Son, are you lost?" The boy turned slowly. His eyes were calm, too calm. "I was waiting," the boy said, "for the bell." The detail that made Thomas sick. The boy's clothes were church servant clothes from the 1800s, exactly the same uniform used when the church first opened. The town gathers. Within an hour, half the town stood outside the church, whispering, watching. The boy didn't cry, didn't panic, didn't ask questions. He just looked around like he had seen this place yesterday. The name problem. The mayor knelt in front of him. "What's your name, son?" The boy hesitated, then said quietly, "I don't think I'm allowed to say it." The old woman who started shaking. An old woman stepped forward, Mary Whitlock, age 78. She looked at the boy, then started crying. "Impossible," she whispered. The church records were brought out. Burial records, baptism logs, servant registries. Then someone found something. A missing child report from 1861. Name removed, face sketch faded, but height, age, description matched perfectly. The question that changed everything. The doctor examined the boy. Healthy, no injuries, normal heartbeat. Then asked, "How long were you inside the church?" The boy answered, "I don't know. After the priest told me to stay, the lights went away." The secret room. They searched the church basement. Behind old storage shelves, they found a hidden door, locked from the outside. Inside, a small room, bed, chair, prayer table, child-height scratch marks on stone. The drawing. On the wall, one drawing remained, a child standing next to a tall man with no face. The town starts remembering. Old stories returned, whispers of children sent to help the church, children who never came back. The boy's nightmares. That night, the boy screamed in his sleep, not words, just one sentence repeated. "The bell means he's coming back." The bell rang again. 3 nights later, the church bell rang at 3:03 a.m. The bell
No one
did not
inside,
ring normally.
but the rope
It
was
dragged,
moving.
slow, heavy, like something tired was pulling it. The town woke in fear. No one spoke it out loud, but everyone thought the same thing. The church was awake again. The boy stopped sleeping. From that night forward, the boy refused to close his eyes, not even for seconds. When the doctor asked why, he whispered, "Because when I sleep, he checks if I'm still here." The temperature drops every night at 3 a.m., breath visible, windows frosting from inside, but only in one place, the altar. The hidden names. Inside the secret room, they found carvings under layers of wax, dozens of names, scratched hard like someone needed to be remembered. But one name had been scratched out violently, over and over, until the stone cracked. The boy finally speaks more. The mayor tried again. "Do you remember the priest?" The boy nodded slowly. He never blinked. The box beneath the floor. Under the prayer table, they found a metal box. Inside, old photos, children standing beside the same priest. Every photo slightly blurred around the priest's face, like the camera couldn't focus on him. The photograph that shouldn't exist. Last photo, dated 1861, but the paper looked newer, and in the photo, the same boy stood there. Not younger, not older, exactly the same. The old woman's secret. Mary Whitlock finally spoke. "My brother was taken to help the church. He was 8. He never came home." The church basement expands. Workers tried mapping the basement, but the measurements kept changing. Rooms that shouldn't exist appeared, then disappeared. The boy remembers the lesson. They told us silence makes you holy. The night footsteps returned, heavy, slow, dragging, but doors remained locked. The rope moves again, bell rope swinging, but no wind. The boy touches the altar. When his hand touched the altar, the bell stopped instantly. The drawing changes. New drawing appeared in the basement. Tall, faceless priest now closer to the child. The town starts leaving. Families moved away. Shops closed early. Lights turned off before midnight. The priest's journal found, hidden inside wall cavity. Last entry, "Time preserves the chosen." Chapter 32. The boy asks a question. The storm that never moved. Thunderstorms stayed over the church for 9 hours, didn't move across town. The door locks itself overnight, from inside. The boy smiles for the first time, at the sound of the bell stopping. The doctor notices something. The boy has no old scars, but memories of pain. The floor beneath the altar, hollow. The hidden ladder, leading down, deeper than the basement. The underground chapel, small, stone, no crosses, only carved circles. The chairs, small chairs, facing one tall chair. The final memory starts breaking through. He said, "God doesn't need witnesses." Story getting darker, old school horror mystery deeper. The air downstairs smelled like old rain and candles burned years ago, even though no candle was lit. The boy refuses to go down. He sits there when he calls. The town records burn, archive room fire, only church records destroyed. The bell rings midday, first time ever. Whole town hears it. Animals panic. The boy finally cries, not fear, relief. Chapter 47. The journal final page appears. Time protects the obedient. The boy ages one night. Hair slightly longer, voice deeper, then resets next morning. Reflection moves half-second late. The truth starts surfacing. The church didn't keep children inside. It kept them out of time. The sound no one could explain. The bell did not ring normally. It dragged, slow, heavy, like something tired was pulling it. The town woke in fear. No one spoke it out loud, but everyone thought the same thing. The church was awake again. The boy stopped sleeping. From that night forward, the boy refused to close his eyes, not even for seconds. When the doctor asked why, he whispered, "Because when I sleep, he checks if I'm still here." The temperature drops every night at 3 a.m. Breath visible, windows frosting from inside, but only in one place, the altar. The hidden names. Inside the secret room, they found carvings under layers of wax, dozens of names, scratched hard like someone needed to be remembered. But one name had been scratched out violently, over and over, until the stone cracked. The boy finally speaks more. The mayor tried again. "Do you remember the priest?" The boy nodded slowly. He never blinked. The box beneath the floor. Under the prayer table, they found a metal box. Inside, old photos, children standing beside the same priest. Every photo slightly blurred around the priest's face, like the camera couldn't focus on him. The photograph that shouldn't exist. Last photo, dated 1861, but the paper looked newer, and in the photo, the same boy stood there. Not younger, not older, exactly the same. The old woman's secret. Mary Whitlock finally spoke. "My brother was taken to help the church. He was 8. He never came home." The church basement expands. Workers tried mapping the basement, but the measurements kept changing. Rooms that shouldn't exist appeared, then disappeared. The boy remembers the lesson. They told us silence makes you holy. The night footsteps returned, heavy, slow, dragging, but doors remained locked. The rope moves again, bell rope swinging, but no wind. The boy touches the altar. When his hand touched the altar, the bell stopped instantly. The drawing changes. New drawing appeared in the basement. Tall, faceless priest now closer to the child. The town starts leaving. Families moved away. Shops closed early. Lights turned off before midnight. The priest's journal found, hidden inside wall cavity. Last entry, "Time preserves the chosen." Chapter 32. The boy asks a question. The storm that never moved. Thunderstorms stayed over the church for 9 hours, didn't move across town. The door locks itself overnight, from inside. The boy smiles for the first time, at the sound of the bell stopping. The doctor notices something. The boy has no old scars, but memories of pain. The floor beneath the altar, hollow. The hidden ladder, leading down, deeper than the basement. The underground chapel, small, stone, no crosses, only carved circles. The chairs, small chairs, facing one tall chair. The final memory starts breaking through. He said, "God doesn't need witnesses." Story getting darker, old school horror mystery deeper. The air downstairs smelled like old rain and candles burned years ago, even though no candle was lit. The boy refuses to go down. He sits there when he calls. The town records burn, archive room fire, only church records destroyed. The bell rings midday, first time ever. Whole town hears it. Animals panic. The boy finally cries, not fear, relief. Chapter 47. The journal final page appears. Time protects the obedient. The boy ages one night, hair slightly longer, voice deeper, then resets next morning. Reflection moves half-second late. The truth starts surfacing. The lantern light
church
barely
didn't keep
reached
children
the stone
inside.
beneath the altar,
It kept them
and yet
out of
everyone
time.
standing there could feel that something below them was awake. The boy stood completely still, his bare feet pressed against the cold floor, his eyes not moving, not blinking. He did not look afraid. That was the part that frightened the adults the most. Fear would have made sense. Crying would have made sense. Silence, however, did not. The mayor asked him softly if he remembered how long he had been inside the church, and the boy answered without looking up that time did not move the same way down there. He said days did not pass. He said nights did not arrive. He said the bell decided when something ended and when it began again. No one understood what that meant, but every man in the room felt a pressure behind his eyes as if the words themselves were heavy. When they lifted the stone beneath the altar, the air that escaped from below was not stale like a basement should have been. It was clean, too clean. It smelled like rain and cold iron. The ladder beneath did not creak when weight was placed on it, and the flame of the lanterns did not flicker as the men climbed down. The boy refused to follow them. He shook his head once and said that children were never supposed to go first. That rule, he said, was very old. Below the church was a space that should not have existed. The stone walls curved inward in a perfect circle, carved with marks that repeated again and again at equal distances, as if someone had measured the room with extreme care. There were small chairs arranged neatly along the wall, their legs worn smooth by use. In the center stood a single taller chair, darker than the rest, its surface polished by hands that had touched it far too often. No crosses hung there, no symbols of worship, only silence and symmetry. The boy eventually followed, slowly, his steps careful, his breathing steady. He touched one of the small chairs and said quietly that this was where they were told to sit. When asked who told them, he answered that the man never liked being named. He preferred to be remembered by the sound of the bell. He said the bell meant obedience. He said the bell meant stillness. He said the bell meant that the counting had begun. As days passed, the town of Blackridge changed without realizing it. People forgot small things at first. A shopkeeper forgot how long he owned his store. A woman forgot the name of a neighbor she had spoken to for years. Children began asking questions their parents could not answer. The church bell rang more often now, sometimes without sound, sometimes only in dreams. Every time it rang, the boy would pause, his body reacting before his mind, as if a command had been given long ago and never revoked. At night, he spoke more. He said there were other children once. He said they were chosen because they were quiet, because silence made them useful. He said the man told them that voices changed things, and change was dangerous. Silence, however, preserved. Silence allowed time to pass without leaving marks. That was why the boy had not aged. That was why the others had faded. They were not meant to grow. They were meant to remain. The records confirmed pieces of it. Children listed as helpers, assistants, choir aides, their names appearing once and never again, their ages frozen on paper, their absence never questioned because the church had always been trusted. The priest who vanished in 1861 was never officially buried. No grave bore his name, no death record existed. It was as if he had stepped sideways rather than forward. One evening, as the sun set and the church windows filled with shadow, the boy stood in the doorway and said something that made the doctor drop his notebook. He said the counting was almost finished. He said the bell would ring one last time. He said when it did, the man would come to see who remained. The mayor demanded to know who the man was, and the boy finally looked directly at him. He was never alone, the boy said. He just learned how to stay. That night, the bell rang at exactly the same moment every clock in town stopped. People stepped outside their homes, confused, breath visible in the sudden cold. The church tower stood against the sky like a wound that refused to close. Inside, the air pressed inward, and the underground room filled with a sound that was not ringing, not breathing, but something in between. The boy stood at the center stone and placed his hand against it. He did not scream, he did not cry, he spoke. And for the first time since 1861, the counting ended.
The boy did not notice when the town stopped watching him with fear and started watching him with something softer, something closer to curiosity. He moved through the streets carefully at first, like someone who expected the world to shift under his feet if he stepped too hard. Every sound seemed new to him. The creak of wooden shop doors opening at sunrise, the distant laughter of children chasing each other through fog, the sound of metal tools striking stone as workers repaired the old church walls that had been left cracked and weakened after years of neglect. He spent most mornings near the bakery, not because he was hungry, but because warmth meant something to him now. Warmth meant time was moving. The baker's oven glowed orange and alive, and sometimes the boy would stand there silently, staring into the fire like he was measuring how quickly flames changed shape. Once the baker asked him what he was thinking about. The boy said fire never stays the same, and that meant it was safe. The mayor arranged for the boy to attend school with the other children, though no one knew exactly what grade to place him in. He could read perfectly, he could write in neat, careful lines, but he sometimes stopped in the middle of simple math problems, staring at the numbers as if they meant something more than counting. When asked why, he once answered that numbers were dangerous when people started using them to count people instead of days. At night, he still woke up sometimes, his body reacting before his mind caught up. He would sit up, listening to the empty air, waiting for a bell that never rang. Slowly, those nights became less frequent. Slowly, his body learned that silence did not always mean waiting. The church itself changed too. Sunlight began reaching deeper into the main hall after workers replaced the warped roof panels. Dust no longer hung in the air like permanent fog. The underground chamber remained sealed behind a heavy iron gate, not locked, but respected. No one entered without reason. The mayor had ordered that the chamber be documented but not disturbed. Measurements were taken, sketches were drawn, but no one tried to remove the chairs or erase the carved marks on the walls. The town had learned that some things did not need to be erased to be survived. The boy sometimes asked to visit the church during daylight. When he did, he walked slowly through the aisles, touching the ends of wooden benches as if confirming they were still real. He never approached the altar stone again. He never needed to. Once, while standing in the center of the church floor, he said quietly that the building felt lighter now. He said it felt like a place where voices belonged again. Months passed and the boy's face changed in ways that only people who saw him every day could notice. His jaw grew sharper, his shoulders widened slightly, his voice deepened by small, almost invisible amounts. The doctor kept records carefully, writing down each change as if documenting a miracle that could not be repeated anywhere else. One winter evening, snow fell across Black Ridge for the first time since the boy had been found. He stood outside the church watching the snow collect along the roof edges, watching how it softened the sharp lines of stone and wood. He reached out and caught snowflakes on his palm, studying how quickly they melted. He smiled then, a quiet, private smile, like someone who finally understood that change could be gentle. The town slowly stopped talking about the church in whispers. Instead, it became something else, a place that reminded people of how fragile time could be. Weddings were held there again, community meetings returned, candles were lit not for fear, but for memory. The boy grew older alongside the town's healing. He learned to joke with the baker. He learned to argue playfully with other children. He learned that not every silence meant something was waiting in the dark. Some silences were just rest. Years later, visitors to Black Ridge would hear the story differently depending on who told it. Some said a lost child had simply been found. Others said the church had once held something that tried to hold time still. But everyone agreed on one thing. When the boy stepped out of that church, something invisible loosened its grip on the town forever. And on certain nights, when the wind moved through the tower at exactly the right angle, the bell would shift slightly on its hook, not enough to ring, just enough to remind anyone listening that time had once been counted there, and then finally released.
Like a pressure had been lifted from their lungs. Others said it felt heavier, like gravity itself had doubled. The lantern flames stretched upward without flickering, thin and sharp, as if the air had turned to glass. The boy's fingers did not tremble. His breathing slowed until it was almost impossible to see his chest move. Above them, in the church tower, the bell began to move again. This time it did not ring, it only swung slowly, back and forth, as though something unseen was testing its weight. The rope twisted on its own, fibers tightening, loosening, tightening again. Outside, the town dogs began to howl, but not in fear. It sounded like recognition. The mayor stepped forward and tried to pull the boy back from the stone, but his hand stopped inches away, as if pushed by invisible resistance. The boy spoke quietly, not to the mayor, not to the doctor, but to the stone itself. He said the words he had been taught not to forget. He said them in a voice that sounded older than his body. The stone vibrated once beneath his palm. Dust fell from the ceiling in slow motion, hanging in the air like frozen rain. Then the ground beneath the chamber gave a long, deep sound, like a door opening somewhere very far below. The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he did not look scared. He looked tired. The kind of tired that belonged to someone who had been awake for too many years without rest. He whispered that the counting had always been wrong. He said someone had been missing from the circles. He said silence was never supposed to last forever. Silence was supposed to hold something until it could be released. The adults did not understand, but the ground trembled again, softer this time, like something turning over in sleep. The carved marks on the walls began to glow faintly, not bright enough to light the room, but bright enough to show that each mark had once been made by a small hand holding a sharp tool. Hundreds of them, maybe more. The boy slowly removed his hand from the stone and stepped backward. The pressure in the room vanished instantly. The lantern flames returned to normal. The air moved again. Somewhere above, the bell stopped swinging. When they climbed back into the church, the night sky looked different. The stars seemed sharper. The wind carried the smell of wet earth, even though it had not rained. The boy stood in the middle of the church floor and looked around like someone returning to a place he had once loved but could no longer recognize. He asked the mayor if the town still celebrated winter festivals. The mayor said yes, confused. The boy nodded slowly and said the last time he remembered winter, there had been candles everywhere and people had laughed inside the church. He said the priest had smiled more back then, before the bell started ringing at night. Over the next days, the town began to notice small changes. The church no longer felt heavy when people walked past it. The bell did not move on its own. The underground chamber remained, but the air inside it felt like ordinary underground air, damp, cold, and empty. The small chairs stayed in their circle, but they no longer felt like they were waiting for someone to sit in them. The boy, however, began to change, slowly, naturally. For the first time, he started to look like a child growing older instead of a child frozen in time. His voice shifted slightly. His height increased by small amounts that the doctor measured carefully each morning. The doctor wrote in his journal that time had finally decided to include the boy again. But sometimes, late at night, the boy still woke up suddenly and listened toward the church tower, not in fear, in habit, like someone who had once been trained to respond to a sound that might never return. One evening, while sitting outside the church steps, the mayor asked the mayor something no one had prepared to answer. He asked if the other children had been found. The mayor hesitated. The boy nodded as if he already knew the truth. He said maybe they were still somewhere quiet. Maybe time had not finished with them yet. Maybe silence held them in a place where they did not feel alone. The town slowly rebuilt its routines. Shops opened later. Children played in the streets again. People started using the church for gatherings once more, though no one ever removed the stone beneath the altar. It remained where it was, not sealed, not opened, simply left alone. The boy began helping the baker in the mornings, learning small, ordinary tasks. He learned how to count money. He learned how to carry bread trays. He learned how to laugh when other children told jokes he did not fully understand yet. And every day he asked fewer questions about the past. Years later, some people would say the church was simply a place where something terrible happened long ago. Others would insist something stranger existed there, something that did not belong to faith or science or anything people knew how to name. But everyone agreed on one thing. The day the boy stepped out of the church was the day time started moving normally in Blackridge again. And sometimes, very late at night, when the wind blew just right across the tower, people thought they heard the faintest echo of a bell. Not ringing, not calling, just remembering.
The first spring after the boy was found arrived slowly, as if the town itself was unsure whether it was safe to move forward again. Snow melted from rooftops and ran down the stone streets in thin silver lines. The river behind the church broke free from winter ice and carried branches, leaves, and broken pieces of old wood downstream, like memories finally being allowed to leave. The boy spent long hours sitting near the riverbank, watching the water move. Movement fascinated him more than anything else. He once told the doctor that water was honest because it never pretended to stay still. It never tried to hold a shape it could not keep. The doctor wrote that down carefully, unsure why it felt important, but knowing it did. Children from the town slowly began treating him like one of their own. At first, they watched him from a distance, whispering about the church and the stories their parents tried not to tell. But children, unlike adults, learn quickly when something is safe. One afternoon, a younger boy kicked a ball too hard and it rolled toward the church steps. No one wanted to go get it. The boy walked calmly across the open space, picked it up, and threw it back with perfect aim. That was the moment things changed. After that, they stopped looking at him like a ghost and started looking at him like someone who could play. He did not understand games at first. Running felt strange to him, not because he could not do it, but because running meant choosing direction, and for most of his life, direction had been chosen for him. But slowly, he learned. He learned the feeling of falling into grass and laughing because nothing bad happened afterward. He learned the difference between being quiet because you were afraid and being quiet because you were thinking. The church bell did not ring once that entire spring. People began repairing the tower, replacing cracked beams and rusted metal joints. Workers climbed inside the bell structure for the first time in decades. They found nothing unusual, no strange carvings, no hidden mechanisms, just old iron and older dust. Yet every worker who spent more than an hour up there said the same thing when they climbed back down. They said the bell felt heavier than it should. Not physically, just heavier. The boy rarely entered the church now. When he did, it was always during daylight and always with someone else. He never asked to go near the altar. He never needed to. It was as if he understood that some doors, once closed properly, should not be tested again. Summer came warmer than usual. The town filled with traveling merchants and visitors passing through. For the first time since anyone could remember, Blackridge felt like a place connected to the outside world instead of isolated from it. The boy watched strangers carefully, fascinated by how easily they laughed, how casually they moved through space without checking shadows first. One night during a summer festival, lanterns were hung across the town square. Music played. Children ran through crowds carrying sweetbread and candles. The boy stood near the edge of the square, watching everything with quiet wonder. The mayor walked over and asked him if he was enjoying himself. The boy nodded and said festivals used to happen inside the church once. He said there used to be singing. The mayor asked what changed. The boy thought for a long time before answering. He decided silence was safer than singing. The mayor did not ask who he meant. He did not need to. Years began passing normally after that. The boy grew taller, his voice deepened naturally. His memories of the underground chamber did not disappear, but they changed, becoming something distant instead of something waiting just behind his eyes. The doctor eventually stopped measuring him every morning. The notes became monthly instead of daily, then yearly. Then finally, the doctor simply wrote one last entry. Time has accepted him. The church remained part of the town, but never again its center. People used it, respected it, maintained it, but no one trusted it blindly again. And maybe that was what saved them.
Sometimes, during strong storms, lightning would strike somewhere near the tower and the bell would shift slightly, never ringing, never swinging fully, just moving enough to remind the town of what it had once been used for. The boy became a young man without anyone realizing exactly when it happened. One winter morning, the baker handed him a tray of bread and called him son without thinking. The boy paused, surprised, then smiled in a way that showed he understood what that word meant now. Not ownership, not control, just belonging. He still visited the river often, still watched the water, still tested the way time moved by watching how fast leaves floated past the same rock. And sometimes, very rarely, he would stand at the far edge of the church property and listen, not because he expected to hear the bell again, but because he remembered what it felt like when time had once stopped listening to him. The town of Blackridge never fully forgot what happened, but it stopped living inside that memory, and the boy, who had once been counted and kept in silence, learned something no ritual could ever hold. He learned how to live in days that did not need to be measured by fear.